I'm Garrick Francis. This is the Inheritance to Income podcast, where we help leaders, families, and founders prepare people and systems, not just assets, for what comes next. I'm your legacy advocate. Let's talk about it. So, as we continue on in our series, What Comes After Success? I've got a guest today who's had a storied career in law enforcement, Marcus Jones, and he's been the police chief in Montgomery County. He's worked with the school system, and he'll get into a little bit more about all the things he's done along the way. But it's important to talk to people who have chosen a life of service, to think about how they have achieved success, all that they have done in others' lives, and then for them, what comes next. And so that's where we're going to start today on Inheritance to Income. Welcome to the show, Marcus.
Well, thank you, Garrick, and it's great to be here, man. Thank you for allowing me to be a part.
That's great. So let me start here. I think hopefully I'll get this right. After 38 years in public safety and serving as police chief and doing the things you've done, many would really call that a successful career.
Right.
But in your mind, when did you first feel like you had achieved success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really think that in my mind it was years before, because in law enforcement, rising to higher levels of leadership it's a challenge because it's a very competitive process. So I would actually say that I felt like I achieved success when I obtained the rank of captain, as I was really kind of navigating the promotional ladder. I mean, it was a high executive position. Again, it was very competitive because you had to compete against others, and your leadership skills really had to rise to the top to give the confidence of the chief who promoted me to put me in a position of that caliber. So that was, for me, that was really kind of the cherry on top as I had navigated a long career in law enforcement.
And you say when you reached captain, in relation to when you became chief and when you retired, what was the time span between that? Like, when did you achieve that level of success?
Yeah, so I obtained the rank of captain in 2011. And then I actually was a captain up until 2018. So for 7 years, in a variety of different assignments. So one assignment of significance was I was over our major crimes division, which oversees homicides, and I did that for about 2 years. But then I was the commander of the Silver Spring district, which was the busiest police district and the one with the most crime and challenges in our community. And that was, really kind of like I would call it almost a cherry on top, because of it. To me, that was an honor to be selected to actually participate, or at least to be the leader at that district. But then, going on 7 years, and then I still had to become an assistant chief that I was appointed by the county executive at the time. And then things moved very rapidly, because a year later, I was now competing to be the chief of police for Montgomery County.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that point of success and engagement with the community and leadership over, people you had worked with, a number of things. And then a couple of years later, you're competing to be chief. And so did becoming chief feel the way you thought it would feel?
No, I mean, it's almost as if no one could prepare you for what you were about to experience, right? Though I had a great working relationship with the outgoing chief of police, and who had been my boss for 15 years, and I had relationships with others who were friends of mine, who were real good colleagues, who have become chiefs of police in other organizations. There's a saying in leadership that one of my brothers that I really was one of my mentors in, working in coming up through the ranks of policing, years ago in the National Black Police Association, and he had a saying for me when I became the national chairman of that organization, and he told me, he's like, Marcus, it's lonely at the top, right? And there's days that you're out there, you're really by yourself. And I took that to heart because I found that you do have to figure out a way to have a support system when you get to those levels. And that's an important thing, I think, for people to realize that there's not always a group of folks hanging around you, right? Especially when it gets hot in the kitchen and challenges come about. So it's important for you to really do have a really strong support base of other leaders and people that you can depend on and go to for advice and support.
That's awesome. That's a great lesson. So how did you actually fill that, what I call relational gap? So you reached a point of success in your life, and you looked around and realized that the people who you had on the come up with and the people around you were still great people, but there was a gap. There was a relational gap with the level of success you had achieved. How did you resolve that gap? And was it just at work, or was it in and out of work?
Well, it was in and out of work. I think that's a great point because, a lot of these, the folks that I work with throughout the years were friends of mine. I mean, we were literally, I became the chief of the department, but I was their boss. And I had been really kind of like their counterparts. And then some of them had been a supervisor of mine along the way, right? But now the tables had turned, and I still had, outside relationships with as friends, right? And literally friends of in a way that they know my family very well. I know their families very well, and it's very tight relationships. But at the end of the day, I had a responsibility, right? And I wanted them to make sure they were aware that I had to be still held accountable for doing the work, right, for not only for the department but for the community, and that that I couldn't lower my morals or my standards about the way that they may perform, right, and I expected that, but I really didn't have that issue, even when there were a few challenges where I there might have been where something had occurred that required me to kind of now deal with a friend, right? But who was really a subordinate per se, and I had to address their performance, and therefore I had to be fair, right? I couldn't, and that was one of the things that was for me from an integrity standpoint that required me to be fair and not to give preferential treatment to people who were my friends, right? And again, people already know this, right? Generally, in that type of environment, people already know who your friends are for the most part, or who you might be closely linked to. So that is something that was important for me to make sure that nobody was getting that, and I wasn't treating anybody any different than anyone else.
Yeah, it's important. One of the things you said you said about how you, and especially for public servants, right? You're in the community. People know you. They know your family. They know. So in that situation, it seems very easy for where your identity and your occupation get linked together.
Oh, incredibly so, right? Incredibly so. And I kind of one of the clear baselines for me is my church is located within Montgomery County. It's in Rockville. And my church is very well connected in the political world, and they were a great support base for myself and my wife and my family through this journey, through the entire policing career per se. But clearly, when I rose to the rank of chief, it even took it to a different level, right? But again, it was about, for me, it was important from a reputation standpoint, and it was easy in a way because my wife is just so, she's just a wonderful person, and deep in the faith and committed to the church. But that was that was our connectivity of really kind of like as that base and expanding out to others, particularly in the Black community, per se. But even beyond that, whether it was the Latino community or the community as a whole, people began to recognize that link, right, of a reputation that my church and the love that they showed. And I'll give a quick example. We were having a national night out event, and my church was one of the communities that participated. And National Night Out is only held once a year. It's the first Tuesday in August, and it's about communities coming together with law enforcement for safe communities, right? And we have this we had this tradition in Montgomery County that it would be the police chief, it would be the sheriff, it would be the fire chief, and the state's attorney. We would all kind of caravan together, right, and go to these different communities. Well, the state's attorney, who I've been knowing for, at the time probably 30 plus odd years, was riding with us, but he was in shock and awe when we showed up at my church, and all of the church community just navigated to me, right, because they were just so, they just showed just such great love and respect. And he was like blown away by it, right? And so, but to me, that was like an example to show that the community of the love that they had, and that wasn't just because of, I think it was because, my wife and I, and again, it was not about bragging about being the chief of police. They had supported me baseline to really kind of like navigate me and push me to that level. They were amongst many in the community, and I'd say that in a way that I always and try to be as humble as possible, in a way that says that, even in certain public service positions that we hold, you don't always do these things by yourself, right? And it's important that when you have that type of support who can talk to those public leaders who may have to make these decisions about who's going to lead these organizations, such as it was for me for the police department, it was the community that spoke, and that was just an example.
Right. No, that's pretty amazing. When you think about the policing that you've done, and policing today obviously has a lot of different headlines and a lot of different things going on. But as a public servant, and people are thinking about their own positions in life and what they do, when did you realize that policing was just about, not just policing, but about trust?
What was the last part?
That it wasn't just about policing the actual day-to-day, but it was about trust. Or was it about something else?
Trust in the community. Oh, yes. Garrick, I will say early in my career, when I say early, because having a 38-year career is a long run, but I will say literally I'm going to say about 2 to 3 years into my career, I realized something. And again, in Montgomery County, I found us to be not unique because in law enforcement, it took a while for blacks to actually integrate within departments and really have the ability to break glass ceilings, right, in so many ways. And when I came in, those things were really happening at that time. But I remember, policing and being, for example, one of my first beats as a patrol officer, I worked in a predominantly black area in the suburban part of upper Montgomery County. And, middle class, right? But there was still some clearly some mistrust in the community with the police department that had a history long before I arrived, right? And I'm a big history buff, and I like to really understand, and understand what has occurred, in yesterday that impacts tomorrow, right? And how people really feel. And I knew that the black community had a big mistrust of policing. And for me, I realized that, there were things being taught to us that were not going to earn the trust of the community. And I was like, no, this can't happen, right? I'm not with this. And I was able to really kind of be able to be with a group of officers, both black and white, who understood that challenge and who took it on and said that things would be different and we would move the needle. And not that we were ever perfect. Even, during my entire time as a chief, I'll never attest to perfection because there's always work, and particularly when you deal with the human race. But I'll say this, I think that I realized that early in my career that trust was a major part of the work, and that if people trusted you, no matter what, they would help you get to the goal and the mission that was set forth. That was for the right reason, right? But if they didn't trust you, you weren't going to get that support, and everybody wasn't going to be on the same page. So for me, it was really early in the career.
Yeah. So then, fast forward over the progression of your career, as you were considering your options, your changes, or when tough times hit, for one reason or another in the community or in the family, what were the structures, or what did you lean on to be able to deal with those adversities? As I know, for a lot of public servants, especially, they can hit a lot of changes politically happen, a lot of
Oh
things
yeah,
in communities happen,
yeah,
neighborhoods, people, the power structures in government and the power structures in neighborhoods
that's
change.
right. That's
So
so true.
how did you
Yeah.
deal with those things?
So I think a few ways, right? One of the ways was having a group of officers that we were sharing the same experience and being able to really be collectively on the same page and work together to support each other, right? And I remember going back, and if we go back to I remember I was in policing during Rodney King, and how Rodney King, though it happened in Los Angeles, right? And though we didn't have social media the way we have it today, but that was impactful in law enforcement. It impacted all across the country, and it impacted our department, right? And I remember again, and you had white officers who felt one way, right? And I would say a vast majority, I'm not saying all of them, but the vast majority of them felt one way. And then you had the black officers who really understood what time it was, right? That this was real talk. We had seen these things happen before, and we were like, okay, this can't be the way it is. And so collectively, we would always really kind of be together to work towards change. We were at a time that I think was important. We had an organization called the Coalition of Black Police Officers here in Montgomery County. And it was a very strong group of folks who were really about, trying to figure out how to navigate the career, how you had to really, break down these barriers that were, and trying to bridge the community and policing to come together, right? But we were conduits in that way because we could go to the black community and earn trust and help to, bring these parties together along the way. And most importantly, I think for us, we had to build each other up. So the way we did that, right, was, again, when we first came on, there were very few black role models in leadership or specialized positions, right? And so we developed these study groups, and we developed different sort of career path to help people get to the places that they wanted to go. And that was helpful for me, right? Because not only was I seeing examples of success in front of me, I was starting to say, okay, I can do that too, right? And that was important for me because I had always kind of been in leadership roles, and I just really wanted to be able to really kind of to bridge the gap in our community and with our people. And then I became the president of the organization, even before I started even getting promoted. Right, that was kind of like that stepping ladder. And then I started getting participating in the National Black Police Association with this organization that now started to even get me to understand what was happening in the whole country and other experiences that officers were having. So yeah, so that was the stepping stone, and that all of that was important because we had really a strong bond. I've got relationships from people all across the country to this day, because we were in that sort of, I call it the battle or the war during that time. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And so all these things you've built and that you and your colleagues have built, how is that prepared people coming behind you?
Oh yeah, because I think what it's done is shown them a pathway, right? That allows them to see that it can be done, right, and that and then if they really, I think what's important for them to understand is that people are willing to share their experiences and their success with you, but you have to be willing to kind of open up and to learn. But I think the reality is that it's been done. There's a recipe for success, and it's about whether or not you want to believe in really doing it that way. I think it's been proven, and many young officers that I see who are taking their unique career paths, they may not necessarily have to fight the same battle we had to fight, right? Because we were able to really kind of break those glass ceilings and knock down doors. They show people that, that officers were capable, we were capable of doing the work, and rising to those levels is just a matter of how would you do that? And so one of the things we would always do is always try to mentor, even when officers first came on the department in the police academy, was to try to really kind of go reach out, put our hand of outreach at that moment in time to say, we're here for you, right? Because this is not going to be easy. And there's some challenges that we want to help you through, and we're always here for you. So whether it's today or whether it's tomorrow, we'll always be here for you. And I think those are the things that we've done. Even though I've retired, I can honestly tell you my phone rings almost every other day for somebody who's still in the profession and has some question about, right, that route to success, right? How do I do X or how do I do Y? And I'm still answering the phone and we're having a conversation.
Well, I think it's beautiful you say you're still answering the phone because, even though you have retired, it's a testament to your service that they still want to reach out to you because in a lot of places, Marcus, 38, 39 years, today, we don't see that for a lot of people looking forward. If you asking a lot of young people today, no matter what profession it's in, will you
That's
be
right.
there 38 years from now? I mean, there's an eye roll, there's a sigh, there's these things. So how do you think, even when you're talking to people who are, somewhere in the middle part of their career or early part of their career to say, you could do this for 40 years?
Yeah. Yeah. I think if people really kind of give themselves, look at what you've accomplished and where you are, right? And think about where you want to be, right? And those really shouldn't be the same place, right? So if it's the same place, I can absolutely understand why somebody would say, well, I'm not doing that for 40 years, right? Yeah. But if you're looking at rising to a different level, right? And whatever that level may be, but that you have something to offer in the profession, that is, in your mind, it probably is unique and different. And that's exactly how I think public service and any profession in many ways evolves over time because people bring innovative ideas to the game. But if you're willing to open up your mind, I'll go back and I'll say I tell people that out of my 38 years, I felt like I had two careers, and though it was one, and then I'll break it down like this. Like, I worked in the world of investigations and patrol, up to a certain level of first line supervision, right? For 19 years, I did that, right? And along the way, I had those other opportunities of doing volunteer work and advocacy work, as I talked about, like with the National Black Police Association, and travel the world and da 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 da, right? But then when I really kind of like zeroed in on police administration, right, that became career number two, the way I look at it, right? That's the 19 other years, right, from police administration all the way to the, all the way to the rank of chief. And so, but at the end of the day, I never looked at those the same way, because the higher that I went, the higher level of responsibility I received. And then it was a higher commitment to the profession than I had ever had before, right? And so I think at the end of the day, really I was telling myself that you can do more, you have more to give. And that I looked at it like I could have retired at 25 years. I would have been 46 years of age. Wow. And I was thinking about that. I was like, nah, I'm not ready to retire at the age of 46, right? And I've got, and I so much more I want to do. And I did probably a lot from the age of 46 till when I retired, which is another probably 14 plus years. And it was like, to me, that was really the sugar on top, if you want to say, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like you have an opportunity if you really open up your mind and you want to really explore all things that you think that you could reach. And I think people really have to be open-minded to that.
Wow. So you said that you could have retired at 46. You then in another 14 years you retired. Now I'm gonna tell on you, because we've gotten to know each other because we're fraternity brothers. We like to hit that little white golf ball around and follow it in the woods and in the fairway and wherever it goes.
In the water, all of that.
But you could have. But now I know that you have quote unquote retired twice. And so as I like to tell people, I don't like the word retire. My mama taught me it really wasn't a good word, that it means withdraw. Right. And none of us are in the withdrawal mode. So I look at you like you redeployed. And so talk to a little bit about what was pulling you either before or after your initial retirement as chief to redeploy, to do something else.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. So I remember literally, like I said, 25 years you could retire, right? And I remember getting to my 27th year and starting to think about retirement, but also understanding that I was way too young and I've been raised in a culture of my family that they work many moons, right? That,
work
70
is honorable.
Plus.
You're honorable.
Right? And yeah, so I was like, I know that I'm going to do something else, right? Whatever I may retire from this police department, but then I'm going to go work somewhere else. The question is where and the when, right? And what do I want to do? Those are the three most important questions I kept asking myself.
The where, the when, and what is it that you want to do?
What was it that I was going to do, right?
Okay.
So there were times, like, for example, when it was, as I had made the decision to retire, right? As the chief of police from Montgomery County, I remember having a conversation with my wife when I first was appointed chief. And I had this conversation with her, and I said, sweetheart, I said, first of all, on day one, I'm eligible to retire from the police department. So if anything goes bad, right, we're good.
Right? I became chief, and it was one of those things where you said, I can be chief because I want to, and I have the freedom to do it, not because I have to.
That's right. That's exactly right. Right. I didn't have to. Right. That's a great point. Right. So now it was like, okay, It's about a matter of how long, if that I can within my control, right? Because everything is not always in your control, right?
That's at that
So
level.
I said, yeah. So that was an important thing for me because it made me realize that okay, any day things could change and you may not be the chief. So, but at the end of the day, I always wanted to have for me, what was my plan? What if I control my own destiny, right? How is this going to end?
If
And
I
I
control
remember
my own destiny, I like that. I like that.
yeah,
If I
control.
control my own
That's
destiny,
always been my
how is
mantra.
it
Yeah,
going?
and I would tell people this all the time. I'm like, do your very best to control your own destiny, right? If you want to make a change, make the change because you want to make the change, not because you're being forced to make the change, right?
Right, right.
And so I when I got to the point of okay, I felt like man, getting to that 5 year mark as the chief of police, and I was like, I've accomplished the goals that I set out for. But I had this conversation with my wife, and I said, listen, if I make it 5 years as the chief of police for Montgomery County, I promise you that I won't go hunting to be the chief of police anywhere else in the country, right? And she's like, okay, I hear you, right? So, but she knew that also, right? That she knows me well, and she was like, yeah,
She said,
yeah, right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, but I told her, I said, but listen, I will always keep my options open about doing other work if I find it to be valuable and fruitful. And it's not going to be, and I'm not going to work harder than I did, but when I was the chief of police. That's the goal line.
say
Yeah.
that again, because that's important for people to understand. When you are, I like to say retirement is the ultimate entrepreneurship, because you now are in
You're right.
control of your own
Right.
destiny, your
That's
funds,
right.
your finances, your structure, those things where you might have had to punch a clock for 38 years, but now
That's
all of a
right.
sudden that's not there anymore. You got to create your own structure, your own
That's
debt.
right.
You got to determine your destiny, but say a little more about that. I think that's important.
Yeah, yeah. That to me that's important because at the end of the day, you have worked. It's like where when we talk about retirement, it's like I think that there's the reward for your work that you've done, right? That you
Mm.
created this finish line. Why are you going to go work anywhere harder than what you just when you really accomplished the goal that you set out for, right? That to me was important, right? For me
Where'd
to
that
make
come
sure I
from?
didn't do
Because
that.
you just said you were raised in a family where people worked till they were 70. The work is just part of who you are. So where did it
Right.
come from for you to create that construct in your mind that I don't I don't have to work. I'm gonna go do something purposeful, and it's gonna
Yes.
you can call it work.
Work. Right. That's right. Yes. I felt like my grandparents kind of taught me this, and they did it by example, not by saying it. Right.
Mm,
They were my role models in so many ways for what they could accomplish with little they had. But
mm,
at the end of the day, I watched them give, right, to people along that way,
wow.
um, in a way, all the way up to like into their late 80s, right?
Mm,
If they were capable of doing it, they did it, right? And it wasn't like they were working harder, but it was naturally within them, right? That they would
right.
give something back, right? To whether it's the community or whether it's the church, whatever it was, right? It was like
Yeah.
they always were just that was just natural within them, and that was something I picked up on. When I was, as I just continued through life, I saw it when I was a teenager, but I saw it even greater as life even expanded the older they got. And that was, to me, was an amazing thing when I know, and I'm like, y'all have done everything that you could have possibly done, but yet you're still out there giving
Still
more,
doing
right?
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that was something I never forgot about. So as I was about to, again, and become retired, I received a phone call, and I have been getting phone calls when I made this announcement and I made it publicly. I did that intentionally right? I didn't do it to get a job, but I did it to really kind of like just to tell people, okay, my time is up. We're ready to pass the baton, right? And I want people to prepare. And I gave everybody time to really to get adjusted to the fact that I would be retired. But along in that journey, the next thing I know, my phone started ringing, right? And people were like, "Hey, have you thought about it?" Right? And I was like, "Oh, here we go," right? But one of the most intriguing phone calls that I received was about the school system, who that has a security division. And at that time, the superintendent was very interested in having a restructure. And her and I had conversations because we've worked together in many ways and with the police department and the school system. It's with some unique challenges that we were beginning to have. And we talked about how things could be better on the school system side. And then she threw it at me. She's like, "Hey, have you ever thought about it?" Right? And I want to create this position that's never been had before to be the chief security officer for the school system and really come in and redo this thing. And that, to me, was the challenge to a degree. But it was also, it was like, again, that opportunity to give something back, right? To my community, because ironically, right, my youngest daughter teaches in Montgomery County, right? So, and I have a lot of friends and family that still are in Montgomery County, right? That have kids in schools and also people who work for the system. And so, and I was like, you know what? I think I might be interested, but I did it with I did it with this. I said to her, it's like, listen, I'll do it, but I got a non-negotiable, right? And if you all can allow me to reach those non-negotiables, and we can come to that happy medium, we might have a deal. And they were like, bet, okay, we'll give it to you. And it was like, and it was crazy because it was right at the time that I was retiring, July 1st, and they were like, we're ready. And they're ready to announce it. And I was like, wow. I was like, can I have 2 months off? They're like, no, we'll give you 30 days.
I remember we were planning, Frat was planning tea times for you to come out of one job. And we turned around and we like, wait a minute, he's back in another one. I was like, we had a tea time for him.
That's exactly right. So I missed all of that. People were like, man, you told us you were retired. And then you're like, and a lot of people looked at it like I was jumping from the frying pan into the fire because of the magnitude of the school system, which was a challenge. It was not as hard. I tell people this. I said, listen, though, I'm going to tell y'all something. The difference between when I went from the chief of police, which was literally a 24/7 job, right? Your phone never off. You don't sleep well at night, right?
365 days a year.
Yep, that's right? No matter, even if you go on vacation, your phone is with you, right? And you're tapped some way, form, or fashion. But when I went to the school system, that didn't happen, right? And I actually was able to sleep well at night. Yeah, there were challenges, right? But it wasn't like to the degree of where I was with policing. So that kind of like died, calmed the waters a little bit. But I was still working, right? I still had some, and it was still challenging for me. And I love people. So I love being around people. I love working with people to try to resolve problems. That's been like, even in the policing world, that was embedded in me to be the problem solver, right? Whether you're trying to solve a case or you're trying to make it better for people to live in their community at peace, right? I wanted to be able to be that problem solver and help the school system. So that was the drive, right? That was it. But end game is like, I knew that there still was going to be an end game, right? That we were going to get to the end one way or another, and here I am. So it's all good.
You said so much in that I could unpack, because you were intentional. You announced you were going to leave the police
Mm-hmm.
force, and you weren't necessarily decided on what you wanted to do. You were open, but you were like, okay,
Yes.
let me put it out there so that if there are conversations,
Yes.
you had a family conversation first. So
That's right.
you were in alignment with your wife. You
That's
had
right.
some intention about what you were trying to put out there and see what comes next. You knew you wanted to serve in some
Mm-hmm.
capacity. You talked a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about your skills, not as a police chief and as a police officer, but as a problem solver. So
Right. That's right.
you reframe the skills you had accumulated over all that
Mm-hmm.
time to redeploy it
Mm-hmm.
in a different way. I mean, there's so much here that's, I think, really golden for people. And then, but here's what I was really interested in. You said you had some non-negotiables. You able to
Yes.
share a couple of those non-negotiables?
Oh yeah. So it was very unique because in the school system themselves, and they're actually almost legislated by, I shouldn't almost, they really are legislated by the Board of Education, and so there's a structure, right, of the staff. The superintendent really gets a little autonomy on how that's developed, but the reality was the way they had been structured was that the chief of security was under like the chief operating officer and not a direct report to the superintendent. Where I thought from my experience, I felt like, and what I had heard, because I had also done some research and some homework with people inside the system, that was a barrier, and so I was trying to bring a perspective of leadership that says, if safety and security is this important to the system, we need to have this direct line of a direct report to the superintendent with that phone that I can have a conversation with whoever that may be, and we can work out those challenges without any interference, right? And so that was one of my big non-negotiables. That was it. It was like, if we can't get there, I don't know if I could do this, right? Because I don't think the benefit will be there, right? In the long run. So that one big non-negotiable that I was able to negotiate.
That's great.
Yeah.
So then fast forward, you're in that position, and like you had done in your previous positions, I know preparing other people along the way and to take over
Right.
and to move into roles, because especially with the new position with the schools, and I know things are political and things change, but
Mm-hmm.
I think you and I talked about how that was never going to be a multi-year assignment. That was never going to take you 4, 5, 6, however many years. You always knew that was kind of a project, something you wanted to accomplish. So
That's
when you
right.
went into a role like that, how intent were you, and how were you preparing others to carry whatever legacy
Yeah.
you all were building?
Yeah. One of the things I focused on when I first came on board with the school system and working with my team was to realize their lack of opportunities for progression, and that the system hadn't been developed for them to be able to be progressed. They hadn't trained them to be in such a place. And I felt like that was lacking in its own right? That there needed to be a pathway for them to have success along the way, because there were many that I talked to that were hungry. They were like, I want to be in the world of supervision. I want to, have this responsibility. And, and again, all of that is a learning process, because you still have to teach people that it's not as easy as it may seem, right? That you're now responsible for other people more so than just yourself. And that's in its own right huge for people to understand the magnitude of the responsibility placed on their shoulders, right? I tell people it's like raising your children, right? You know you have to do that every day once you have kids, right? And that's lifelong. But I will tell you, there are some people who don't really understand the magnitude of supervising other people, right? And what that means. And so I really wanted to provide some guidance and give them some of my experiences and my expertise to share in a way that they were able to grip it as soon as I could really get them to start seeing it differently, right? And I was trying to get them to really look at our role in the school system in policing to make it look, to help them see it differently. So that was intentional on my part right from the beginning because I always believe in career growth. And I felt like, even in the short term, we made some strides, but there's a lot of room for that. But no matter who takes those positions, people first here is an important part of your leadership skills, and making sure that people have an opportunity to be able to grab that baton because you're not going to be there always. I tell people one of my favorite things I would say when I was the chief, I was like, there's going to be probably a few years down the road. It may not be very long, but people will be like, who? Marcus Jones? I don't remember him. Who's that? Right? Yeah. So your time is like, you may think it's that long. In reality, it might be that long, when we look at the big picture, right? Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to be gone. Your name will fade, but the legacy is who and how you've prepared other people to carry the value of the system.
That's exactly right. That's
created,
it right there, Garrick. That's it. That is it, man. Yes. Yeah.
So then that's awesome. So then the school system thing, like I said, you redeployed and now you're redeployed. So now as you look forward after your most recent, retirement, well, first of all, let me go back and ask you this question. So before we close out, if you were fortunate enough to stay in that role for a long time, but I'm sure over the time you saw people, especially in later stages of their career, whose careers were disrupted, right? I mean, there are times where you got a position or a promotion, other people didn't. They maybe moved on, or there were other people who it was just the time was kind of written on the wall. So when people are faced with, looking at the end of their career, either with intention or with a disruption, what are two or three things you either went through or two or three things you would, as a supervisor, you advise people? What are two or three nuggets you would give people facing that kind of either, self-designed disruption or disruption that's kind of dropped on them?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a great question. One of the things that was near and dear to my heart about this and having conversation with people as they were planning to retire, because I was amongst a group of folks that were all of what you described it was happening on often. And one of the things I would always say to people is, no matter what your decision is, have a plan. Because what I saw was sometimes people saw what they thought was the rosy side of the street, and when they retired, they were on the outside looking in with tears in their eyes because they missed what they were doing every day. It wasn't the same, and because they didn't have a plan, right? They thought they did, but they really did. They hadn't prepared themselves for the new them, right? The new retired, individual, right? And so to me, I always stress to them is like, you gotta have a plan about what do you want to do, whatever that is just please have a plan, right? And that's the greatest advice I could give them.
That's awesome. So for you personally, do you have again, I don't like to use the word retirement. Do you have a redeployment mentor? Somebody who's been there before? And
I do. Yeah, actually I do. I have a good friend of mine who has recently retired as the chief of police and has kind of gotten to the world of where I'm at now, and has helped to guide me with some good literature that helps you. That gives you some good pointers on some things that you can and to be prepared for. So that was important for me, and we have conversations weekly. Yes.
Weekly. That structure is really important.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Yes.
So then, okay, before we close out, I have to ask you this one last question.
Okay.
So Marcus, after all the titles and the assignments and the accomplishments and the public expectations and things that you have done, what do you still feel called to do?
I still feel called to be of service. I think there's still volunteer work. There's my expertise that I don't want to go to waste. I want to make sure I'm sharing that,
Mhm.
whether it's a young 21-year-old or someone who has been in a profession for 21 years. Or even in the world of advocacy in my community to give something back to my community. So I've got a lot of work to do. I'm still prepared in that way, right? To advocate and to be of service. So that is on my agenda.
That's awesome. We got a few tea times out there too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Look, I really want to thank you for joining me. I really appreciate your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you
Thank you,
for
my
all you've
brother.
done in the
Thank
community,
you,
and
thank
thank
you.
you for these things. And so, um, uh, again, this is inheritance to income, and I hope you've heard something here that touched you or that changed you. And if you did, please hit that like or subscribe button. Share it with people in your community, and let them know that there is a next chapter, and then there is more work to do. If you have intention, if you have a plan, if you have opportunities, that you have so much more to still give and to live on purpose. And so, again, thank you for joining us on Inheritance to Income. I don't take it lightly that you've granted us this time. God bless you, Marcus, and God
God bless you,
bless.
my brother. All right, Gary. Thank you, my brother. Thank you, sir.